It's heartening to see so many people have nothing better to do on a summer evening than to come out and talk about zoning. So I appreciate you all attending this evening. I'm Lance Grensback. I serve as chair of the Winchester Planning Board. What I'm going to do is give you a very brief introduction to the project that we're going to be talking about tonight and a little bit of a background. Then we're going to introduce the three design teams and ask them to make their presentations. So what we are talking about when we say the Waterfield block is the area between the commuter rail station, Waterfield Road, and Church Street. What's outlined in the solid yellow there is the publicly owned parking lots. What's in the dotted line are the privately owned stores and properties there. So that's what we say the Waterfield block. We're talking indiscriminately the whole area. We have two questions that triggered the work. First, we looked at that area and we said, what's the redevelopment potential of the area? As you can see from the shots, and I think most of you are quite familiar with the location, it's a fairly big space. It's been used as a railroad station, as a parking lot for many, many years. But also on the bottom left there, it provides access to the businesses, to D'Agostino's, and the Patisserie, and others along there for their service trucks and things. But if you look in the upper right, if you look at it sort of carefully, you'll notice it's not terribly well-used space. There's a lot of unused space, a lot of inaccessible locations there, and it's pretty sort of underdeveloped. So if you're sort of saying, where in Winchester Town Center can I find a reasonably sizable parcel which I can think about redeveloping, this certainly is sort of a target to begin to think about. It's also an interesting site. Let's see where our town planner people dug back into the records and found there's a 30 or so inch NWRA regional sewer that runs through there in the bottom right. The architects will point out later on some of the drawings. So there's a very large sewer. You can't build on top of it directly easily. So one question is, what's the redevelopment potential of this area? The second question we had was, what do we want in this area in relationship to the reconstruction of the MBTA commuter rail station? The MBTA is committed to reconstructing the station. The platforms and ramps are sort of failing. They're going to reconstruct both of those. Their current plan is to reconstruct it pretty much as is, where it is. The ramps will be longer and different angles. But the question they were asking us is, if we want to do anything else, we want different access, we want to move the ramps, particularly in the Waterfield area, we need to tell them sooner rather than later. The other thing that would make this difference is that the building in the lower right, which used to be the train station and now houses the Chamber of Commerce, it's I think David Anderson called it a marvelous example of mid-century architecture. That is going to come down as part of the station reconstruction. And that will open space there and change the configuration of the area. So again, the question for us is, what's the redevelopment potential? And if we want to do anything, access to the station, change anything there, we have to tell them sooner or later. So those two questions are sort of driving part of tonight's discussion. A bit on how we got there. We did a phase one master plan that looked at the town a few years ago. One of the consistent themes we heard was that the town center needed some attention. We heard that the zoning was outdated, that the process for doing development was Byzantine and time-consuming, that the parking was a mess, that floodplain litigation issues were inhibiting people from even thinking about developing. And that triggered the Town Center Initiative. We put together a series of efforts to take a look at the town center. We were fortunate to capture a technical assistance grant from the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance for their Great Neighborhoods program. Ian Anderson is here tonight to represent that. We've used that money over the last 6 to 9 months to take a look at some of the foundation issues. We've done a review of the zoning, done a review of housing market in the area, done a review of the economics. So we put together a series of building blocks under this. The next step was then to say, well, what is your vision for the town center? How do you want the town center to change, if at all, in the future? And then to translate that into a plan that changes the zoning bylaws. Right now, many of the things you might want to do cannot be done, either because the zoning caps the height or makes it impossible or requires kind of a shopping mall of parking around any building in order to qualify for the parking standards. So the question was, okay, how are we going to get there? When we began looking at the whole problem, we said it was a bit intangible just to sit there and look at a map of the town center and say, what do you want to do? And we said, why don't we develop some case studies and look at specific blocks to give it a tangible sense of what we could do. So the Waterfield block is serving as a case study for us. What we're doing tonight is asking the design teams to look at development concepts for that block. We're going to use that then to sort of sketch out a general sort of development plan for that block, and then see what we have to do in terms of changing the zoning requirements to make that realistic. So basically, we can't do anything on that block until the town and town meeting approves zoning changes that make it feasible. At some point in the future, perhaps that development we see tonight will go forward, but we need to set in place the rules of the game in terms of change zoning in order to make it feasible for the developers and property owners to do anything. So I'm going to come back to this theme tonight. When you start worrying about the shape of the shingles and the color of window sashes tonight, you're way down in the weeds. We're going to stop tonight at the question of placement of building, size, location. This is things that we can set in the zoning we might want to change to make development like this feasible. That's the target for tonight on the specific designs. So we put on an RFP a couple months ago for consultants to help us develop. It was funded by, in the Great Neighborhoods Program, technical assistance money, and some of the planning board's funds. We had 12 firms that responded. All of them were really quite qualified. We were quite lucky to get that response. We selected 3. They're here tonight, Abacus and LDA Associates. I'll introduce them shortly. What we did then was give them something like this as the rules of the game. We said, so start with a blank slate, as much as you can. There's no existing plan out there, and assume there's no zoning restrictions, that we would basically rewrite the zoning at some point to do this. So don't be constrained by what's down the ground today. And also we don't have any specified development program of how much retail or housing you have to put in. We said you should consider a mix of uses, retail, restaurant, office, housing, and so on, public space. We basically told them, use your imagination, your experience, and your best professional judgment to put in there what you think might work. Do that. We asked them to make sure that the concepts, so we included the entire block or just the town-owned portions. I think most of them looked at the entire area. We asked them to address access to the commuter rail station, going back to the earlier slide. That was one of the critical questions we had. And also we had to be aware of and maintain the clearance over the MWRA sewer line, because that would be a showstopper to build on that one. We asked also that they complement in the design ideas the town common, and at least complement, begin to think about how it would integrate with the architecture history and scale of the village town center it is today. And finally, we re-emphasized to them several times that this is a concept exercise to drive zoning changes, which may eventually lead to development, but there's no commitment and no money on the part of the town or the property owners of the sites today to actually go ahead and do this. So this is to set the stage for what we hope might come in the future. So what we're going to ask people to do this evening is we cleverly organized them in alphabetical order. So what we're going to do is ask each one of them to work through their presentations. We're going to ask everybody to give a 15 or 20 minute presentation and leave about 20 minutes for you to ask them questions. If we do that with some rigor, we'll work our way through and have 40 or 45 minutes left at the end, which will open up to both the design teams and the audience the questions. So what do we learn? What are the implications? What do people like? What do we think we should be doing in this area? And that will then set the stage for further work. We'll discuss a bit more of that. So with that, David, let me introduce David Eisen from Abacus and give you the setup thing and ask you to introduce the team member.
Thank you. I guess it's better with the microphone here. Does it say North? Yeah, so David Eisen, Abacus Architects. This is my partner, David Pollock, and Derek Little from our office. I have this red pointer here. I guess I can point everybody out. And we've been working with a landscape architecture firm, Ground Incorporated, Shauna Gillis-Smith, and Andrea Pirelli. And I wanted to thank Town Planner Elizabeth Weir, I wanted to thank the Planning Board, and I wanted to thank the Smart Growth Alliance for all of their support. And this has been, I think, a terrific process. I mean, you'll have to judge for yourselves. Most towns address planning and zoning and development in a reactive way. And Winchester's decided to be proactive, making some decisions about what's good for Winchester. And I think that's a terrific thing. Now I'm going to start out by disorienting everybody. Here's the site that is oriented in a different way. Here are the railroad tracks on the bottom. Here's the common. Here's town center and the rotary. And so here's our site. Here's the playing field. And all of our plan images will be the same orientation. So if you can orient yourselves just a little bit. Wonderful site, right between the residential neighborhood and the common, right near the town, right next to the train station, right plugged up against the Great Wall. So there's both the challenges and the opportunities. And as we looked at the site, as Lance mentioned, it seems underutilized given how great this location is. There's some really nice stores and buildings here, but, you know, parking lot. And we looked at this, we decided to look at this with a broad brush and say, suppose all of these buildings disappeared. Suppose we started with a blank slate. We need to bring back the retail. We need to bring back all the great things that are already there, but potentially in a new form. There are a couple of historic buildings there that could conceivably be saved, and we understand they're important to the town, but for the moment we said, let's see what happens when those are removed. And you can see this in the larger context of the river and the water. And I'm going to turn this over to Shauna, who's going to talk about some of the sort of broad issues that we wanted to deal with.
Okay, so as David mentioned, I'm really just going to go through a few broader ideas and observations about the town to really set the framework that we started to look at this project from. The first is that it's a lovely, lovely downtown. And I live in Arlington, actually, and spend quite a bit of time in the Fells. So drive through Winchester or ride through Winchester quite frequently. But one of the things that is always sort of striking and somewhat confusing is it's a beautiful urban fabric. And then you hold your breath, dive underneath the wall, and on the other side, it's a beautiful urban fabric. One of the things that we looked at very closely are different ways to address that condition. There's clearly benefits to having the railway wall. Not only does it provide the opportunity for transit-oriented development, it allows people to get downtown or out of the city without having to use their cars, cuts down on vehicular traffic. But there's also other possibilities. The top slide is showing views from the railway platform itself. The second slide shows actually the exquisite quality of the stone of the project. And on the bottom is a slide from another project, which is really showing how infrastructure such as this, historic infrastructure, can really be integrated into the character of the town and the city. So both pros and cons, and really, as you can see with the arrows, the goal of this project is about connections to the larger realm, but primarily connections within the town itself. Now I mentioned the sort of pros and possibilities of the railway connection, but in a larger framework, the gap, the barrier that the wall creates is actually doubled in many instances by the location of the parking, making it kind of an untouchable zone. So instead of being this wide, it actually becomes this wide, and one, it becomes something that isn't really tied to the city. So another of the big picture ideas that we were looking at was ways to integrate this railway wall, which is actually an incredibly beautiful piece of infrastructure. How can we tie that into the city, into the town? Oops, I'm sorry. In some cases, the tavern, it's about bringing the architecture right up into a very comfortable adjacency with the railway structure. But in other cases, it may be extending the landscape, for example, extending the character of the common, and maybe using that stone as a springboard for the character of the landscape, the benches or the paving, or even some touches of the stone cladding on the buildings that are being built around. So really trying to build upon something that really could further enhance the quality of the town. And then the one other characteristic that I wanted to mention about Winchester that I always find quite remarkable is that it really is a town of lakes and rivers. From a residential and recreational and civic experience. And I think that the possibility of building upon that, not directly on our site, but the waterway that is across from our site, which right now is a channel. And when, I'm sure when there's extreme water events, there's no place for that water to go. So by potentially sculpting the edge of that, regrading it allows, it allows places for the water to expand, but also allows for very different characters when it's a dry condition or when the water needs to be absorbed. So with that introduction, I'll pass it back to David to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Shauna. To go from these broad conceptual ideas to a kind of real design, we did a whole series of design studies, which I'm not going to get into. Some of you might have been in the previous presentation where we walked through people, kind of all the kinds of investigations we looked at. For tonight, I'm going to just show a picture of all these different plans, and we developed a model so we can look at this in 3 dimensions, and you can see it here. This is quite an old model, and we've gotten way beyond, but it gives us the opportunity to get a sense of what the spaces might look like, and then to figure out how to deal with the site as it slopes down. And you'll see here, the tracks on the bottom, Church Street on the top, and these numbers are the elevation of the site above sea level. So you'll see Church Street is only a couple of feet below the level of the railroad tracks, even though it's 20 feet from the railroad tracks down to their base down below. So making a connection between Church Street and the railroad tracks without walking all the way downhill and all the way back up is one of the things we were looking at, along with making connections between the common on the right and our development proposal. So here's a bird's eye view of where we, I hate to say ended up, but where we're at with the development of the design. Here are the railroad tracks over here, and here's the common over here, and you can see we are proposing, as Shauna had talked about, getting rid of some of the parking and asphalt and enlarging the common, and some redevelopment along the river so that the river is connected more to the town and its life. Now what we did in developing the property itself, again, we assumed that the buildings were gone, and the first thing we did is wrap the whole site with buildings just the way most of Winchester is defined. This is a traditional way of doing downtown. You push buildings to the street, and you have retail around the bottom, so it's a wonderful shopping street. So in some ways, this along Church Street isn't that much different than the way it is now. The retail down below, and it's a little bit taller. When you go around the corner to Waterfield Road, you have a building wall that forms a backdrop for the common. This is something we heard repeatedly, to sort of build this out as a backdrop for the green space. And what we've tried to do, it's sort of a continuous building, but the roofs go up and down, there are bays, the walls go in and out. So we're not really pretending that this would be built over the course of 100 years, but we're suggesting the sort of qualities of incremental growth that makes this feel like a building that would be in a village as opposed to a big city. Then here's the common, and then we are opening up, when it's a backdrop, that there's a gateway into the sort of new development. So when you walk in here, there's shops to the left or to the right, a coffee shop to the left, and you gradually rise up. So it's 20 feet from here, from the Waterfield Road, up to the railroad tracks. So we have a series of, I'm not going to call them ramps, because so legally a ramp is something that's over a 5-degree slope. These are low inclines. You know, what the MBTA has now are ramps. They're steep, and you go up and you go up and you're up, and it's very steep. And if you're pushing a baby carriage or in a wheelchair, man, oh man, it is tough getting up there. We've terraced the landscape, so there's a gently inclined pathway that leads you from Church Street or from Waterfield Road up and through the site. And every step along the way, there are kind of wonderful things to see and do. And, you know, one of the things that has always characterized train stations is that they're great places. You know, they were the symbolic heart of a town. And it's hard to say this train station is much more than a bare minimum functional place to wait for the train. So what we wanted to do, we have this sort of tower element here. So there's a cafe here, there's a great big skylight on top of it. This kind of a symbol of the importance of the train station. I'll show some other images of this. And in the center of this, we have a series of green spaces, and then ringing this up above is residential. So we have about 100 apartments that... 70, excuse me, I stand corrected. About 70 apartments right next to the train station. You know, this is sponsored by the Smart Growth Alliance. What's smart growth? Smart growth is about having people live near the center of town and live near train stations, so you don't need to have a car. We do, however, underneath all of this is parking, so there are about 120 some parking spaces that disappear out of view. So if you look at this from, here's the common on the left, you look at the corner of Waterfield Road and Church Street, you see this sort of, you know, could be masonry buildings that push in and out and, you know, are kind of an animated architecture, but still a backdrop. And that leads you down, and here's the entry to the train station area. And so here's looking, here is the Great Wall. Here's the common with, this is, right now is parking, it's all asphalt, we're suggesting it's green space. And you're looking into the sort of entry to this whole area. So you go up a low incline, or you go up the steps, you go to a cafe here, you go to a little restaurant here, and you move up through it. And you can see further on, you know, so every step along the way, you can see where you're going to, your destination, your pathway that will get you up to the train station. Yeah, and let me just add, underneath this open space is the easement for the sewer pipe that was mentioned. So we provided access, but instead of having everyone say, oh yeah, that's the access to the sewer pipe, it's this great pathway into the development. And as you can see, you know, out in the summer, it's a great place to eat. Here's that tower at the train station. And there is a really nice stone on the Great Wall, but we're suggesting you can clad it with some other material that gives it sort of life and vitality, and then it zips underneath this overpass. So when you're on the opposite side, there's a sense of everything that's going on here. And we understand that people access this from both sides. This is the only access to the train station. For better or for worse, it's the only one that we have, you know, that's sort of within the domain we're working on. So you move up, so if you proceed up here, you get to this corner. So off to the right is Waterfield Road. Here's a passageway to Church Street. And here you can see you're going to the train. You can go up these steps, or you can sort of take this sort of lazy ramp up here.
Go back to the previous slide. So the red umbrellas in the back of the picture, you're standing in those umbrellas in the next image. And looking
Yeah.
to the right.
So you're here, and then you turn, that corner right there is this corner right here. And here's residential up above. This could be commercial space, it could be office space. This, we figured, was some sort of community space. It could be a cafe, it could be a restaurant, it could be farmers markets, it could be movie night, it could be where you have schools presenting Christmas carols, it could be all kinds of great things. Again, right near the train station, right near the common, right near where people are coming and going. Then you keep going up, and you get to this point, and you turn around, and here's the incline that leads up to the train platform up here. Here's another cafe where you can get a cappuccino. Here's the residential up here, and the roof of the community space is covered with grass. So it's a green space, and you could have a musician playing down here, sort of reclining on the grass. So it's both the roof of the building and it's a green space. And then if you live here, you look out over everything that's going on all around you. You look out to the common. Here's the passageway to Church Street, back down to the road, and right off to the right is the train station. And I'm going to quickly go through these. This is all built above parking, but because the site slopes down, the parking is really the same level as the parking is right now. And all of the ramps and plazas you saw are built on top of that. And you have an entrance from near the common, and then here's the pathway and the loop of ramps and retail, restaurants, cafes, could be office space. As you move up, it's residential, and you're looking down on the roofs of the buildings, and you keep going up, and as you go up, the ground steps up, so our building steps up, and you can see as those pieces of building disappear. We drop down at the site, we rise up at the site. And here's just another view with the train station in front, and that whole loop, the passageway, we walk from there and around there, we turned around, and then we viewed it from up there, and this is another bird's eye view for orientation. And I don't know if either of you have anything to add? Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. And I guess we're going to do questions and answers for each group.
Questions, answers, reactions. Again, remember, we're looking at the question of what can be developed and what are the implications for height, size of buildings, placement, uses, things like that. Right now, a reminder, we could not develop something like this in the current zoning. Okay, we don't allow mixed use. We can't put housing over the retail. The building height will be capital. So what we're looking for here is people's reaction to the general structure and ideas of how the architects utilize the space and what works and what doesn't. So open questions to them or comments if you like.
I just wanted to sort of suggest, which is that we probably, the discussion that we could all have after we've heard from all three might be the most interesting. And so we might want to go quickly through questions to us and the other presenters that are more about clarifying the individual sets of ideas.
It's open discussion here. We'll look at all three. The other thing I would request, the acoustics in this room are just terrible.
Yeah.
So stand up and yell at people if you have a question.
This
Doesn't work. You have a parking lot underneath.
Yeah.
Can you get to it from Waterfield?
Yes, from right over here.
Do you have a picture of that? I mean, it goes down from there?
Yeah.
Straight in, that takes up the retail space right there.
So it's right here, yeah. So there's retail here, because the site slopes, you enter the retail here, the retail goes there, there's a parking garage there, and then right around the corner, there's more retail. So
it's hidden away.
we hate entrances to parking garages, but if you want to get into the parking garage, yeah. And we had to keep it as low as possible, because if it's up high, then you're ramping down a full floor. Here, you're just ramping down a couple of feet. And let me just add, in terms of the heights, this is with the parking level, it's 5 feet, 5 floors, 4 floors, 3 floors. Conceivably, we felt like you could add another floor because, the one floor of this disappears underground. So, but that's sort of what we thought was appropriate density and possibly a little higher in the back.
What's the net change in the parking availability in that area? For the public?
That's how many spaces we're proposing.
How many are there?
really decreasing the number of parking in this project. And it's not that we're sort of being like nuts and bolts about solving it. We're trying to look at kind of bigger picture visions that can assist in the thinking about the development of the downtown of Winchester. I mean, parking is obviously an important issue for retailers, and we understand that. So the idea, whether the number, if we need to add an extra parking floor underneath, we could. So that's not real. So I understand your concern, and it is something that we talked about a lot, and we decided just for the particular scope of this project that we wouldn't concern ourselves so much with the numbers, but it's a very legitimate concern. And so ways of thinking, I think the big takeaway from it is that parking could be thought of in a different way, such as in structured underground parking garages.
Another thing to keep in mind, we've lost some parking when we expanded the common, but right now, there's parking in this area, I think, and I don't know how many parking spaces there are now. I think we have a small increase in the number of on-site parking spaces, because right now, there's no parking underneath these buildings, and we're proposing a bunch of parking spaces. Here, we're losing some parking spaces. So I would think we have maybe about 20 more on-site than we have now.
Steve, what's the impact on the residential community in the south? Putting in a 4 or 5-story structure there, starting with the homes that are
Off in this direction. Off here. Yeah. Our feeling was there wasn't much impact. They're surrounded by really tall trees. They seem pretty secluded from the site. We didn't tromp in people's backyards, but that was our sense in talking to people on the planning board, that this wasn't an inappropriate height, and we sort of feel that way. That you might see it over the top of the trees, or when the leaves fall off, you'd see it through, but we don't expect a big impact.
Is there any further access to the river or only along the road?
There's access through here.
describe it as
The
proposed potential of another cafe or something is drawn here, and then that's the location of the existing passage, and that would be being drawn large to make more of a communication.
So we're looking at 3 major connections through. One is the walkway on either side of the road. Then there is an existing, and the potential to expand it. But the third connection is the proposed connection through the wall in this place. And that was the reason for the orientation of that gesture from the comment. So really, we were, as we talked about at the very beginning, trying to look at connections connecting the 2 sides of Winchester.
I know the planning board has been talking about having that third connection. So it's sort of on the agenda, whether it's in the budget or not, then probably not.
We would probably have to maintain some sort of access road on the east side down to the infield playgrounds down there. But we explicitly told the designers and architects, don't worry about the details. We're really worried about the massive use of spaces there. If you're ever to go forward with a project like this, there would be innumerable details to work out down there. Again, it's what are the concepts and what works, what doesn't, what the people like. Other comments, questions of the listing? Anybody violent reaction that like it, dislike it? Steve?
Steve Cohen. I noticed that you also taken away the average road parking lot and the road gets you to being fueled playground area. We got all the favor of it, but I suspect there's going to be resistance to that.
And this is to get something, a concept on the table that you pay a price when you have that parking and road. You disconnect the common and all of this from the river. And we're saying, suppose you swing the other way. You're paying a price and lost access and lost parking, but you gain something in return. And ultimately, it's probably a balance. but we push things as far as we can to get exactly these kinds of questions.
And actually, the other, one thing that we were debating about is, do we keep some type of connection through that? I'm sorry. The other thing that we were debating during the design process is, do we actually keep some connection in front of that hardscape to connect to the parking space beyond them? And it could be done in a way that it felt like an extension of the plaza in terms of the material. So it wouldn't necessarily be asphalt, but you could have either a curb or bollards that delineate the difference between the pedestrian realm and the vehicular realm.
Okay, Mark, I'm just curious, what do you envision for the first floor of the long section running from the tracks towards Church Street, that last first floor? What do you recommend using there?
Well, we originally were thinking it could be retail, that it's hard to get stores to survive here. And then we thought, well, it's residential. But then we felt like, wow, we're walking past. So what we figured is the perfect balance is to have office. You have an accountant, you have a lawyer, that kind of thing. An architect. We couldn't afford the rents, but, ideally an architect there. It would be a great location, people coming and going, taking the train. But that's what that glass represents.
And the spaces around the outside of the site would be pretty, they're really, by the passages through the site, they're divided up into $6,000 to $8,000, $5,000 to $8,000 pieces of a floor plate. So they would be really a
Square foot.
restaurant. What, square foot?
You said dollars.
Square foot spaces. So they would be, you could put restaurants all the way around, or any other kind of retail on Church Street and Waterfield Road.
And their access from the street, but then they can spill out in the courtyard. So like tonight, the restaurant that you enter here, you go out and you eat in the backyard. And not so great in the winter, but the spaces aren't so vast that if there weren't tables out there in the winter, it wouldn't be, still a great place to be. And the last meeting a month ago was great. We got a lot of good, feedback on the square footages of retail and restaurants that the area really needed, and it seemed, really trying to take that into account in developing these plans. Wouldn't have what? Yeah, and what's great in this shade that's great in the summer isn't so good in the winter. So, the sun's coming from here. So, yeah, this would get a lot of sun, this would get less sun. And it's certainly an issue. We had a lot of discussions. There's often the question about what's right and wrong in relationship to the sun and what's right and wrong in relationship to the street and everything else. And there's a difficult balance in a location like this. But
That's all for questions, and then we'll move on. Okay, thank you.
thank you very much.
Next group is Alex and Hayes from the AAW. I mentioned earlier, reinforced that when we have the 12 groups to select from, we purposely try to select 3 different groups, all of them are extremely good architects and designers. We push to get people that have different backgrounds, different approaches, different styles, not because we favor one design over another, simply we thought that the most useful thing we can get out of their expertise is to push our thinking out in very different directions. So one of the things I know we're going to get out tonight, I look at some of the materials, we're going to see very different approaches to setting this area up. And that's on purpose. Again, we're not going to build it on morning. The question is, how we use the space and what we want to think about. What works out there, what guidelines does it give us for the future. Alex, do you think does it work?
It's actually my partner.
Oh, good, Mr. Hyder.
So Nick Whitman, my partner, has just arrived. You're welcome to join me. We'll try to move through this quickly because I know we've got another one after us. But our approach in first taking a look at the site is a little bit different in that we couldn't help recognizing, I think as everybody did, the bifurcation of the town by the viaduct. And in looking at the Waterfield site, we kept analyzing, but our sense was that if we didn't address the whole viaduct as an idea, it would be difficult to focus on one part and project. So we have sort of expanded the site to include the viaduct. The goal and focus was to tie the two sides together, of course, and the other was to create another landmark, say, in the town, thinking of it always as a threshold, because right now there are two vehicular access points, one pedestrian one, but they're not very celebratory. They're perfunctory infrastructure that you pass under. So this is where our mindset was as we moved forward. You're welcome to cut in anytime you like. So the distinction, for example, between the church steeple as a landmark that we all recognize in every kind of American town, and things like that, the tree, the common, to me is another one of those landmarks. And then the potential of this viaduct to do something much more than it does. That's celebratory, perhaps even civic. And then the exacerbation of that by virtue of how you get up there with ramps that are larger than I think they need to be, and aesthetically, I mean, other than the fact that they have deteriorated over time, they're aesthetically, again, an expedient, a way of getting up without any other thought behind it. And so that was something that we focused on as well. And then we were, of course, fascinated by these views or alleys that go up to the viaduct, and we're constantly coming around each building the first time we walk down Thompson Street, looking for something to happen at the end of them, and of course we're disappointed repeatedly. So at least we wanted to see the viaduct at the end, but it's also blocked, which led to some ideas about how to deal with the viaduct on this side. And then, of course, Winchester Terrace is a kind of fascinating connection, but also then, of course, disappointing when you get to the end of it. It connects, of course, all the way out to the park side and then to the viaduct where you're sort of, again, terminated by a utilitarian building. The difference between the sort of beaten paths and some of the landscape that's developed and very nice. Obviously this is a possibility for development. So our approach here was not to make specific suggestions about the design and layout of any parks, etc., but to provide a kind of overview for it. But these are things that we focused on, and they are justifications for creating much stronger links to the landscape, one side to the other. And then, of course, the existing opening near our site, we wanted to just shove it over and connect it to the Winchester Terrace. So I think as probably everybody wanted to do. There's the parking lot on the larger site. We really looked at extending the site beyond the viaduct on this side because we think this is underutilized in ways that we could really enhance the connection here, and also really look at the site from here all the way to the other side of the rotary, including this edge, of course, and this edge, which are currently taken up by the circulation to the viaduct. So for us, one of the most important things were the edges, of course, and how the town could re-engage those edges. So these are just analytical drawings. I'm going to zip through them. Of course, everyone's familiar with the waterway with relation to the site, the green spaces, the size of the circulation that comes up to the viaduct, which is so much narrower. and of course the building footprints. And then from a use perspective, we just were interested in isolating residences, just looking at them from civic buildings to the commercial buildings. And I mean, as you can see, they're sort of concentric and focusing in on the town center. So for us, in looking at this seems intensely underutilized, as does our site, as does this portion. And if these are how we can tie the site together, it was natural to think about what can be done. You know, we examined the parking. Obviously, these parking spaces have nothing to do with our site, but they're all surface parking. Here, our sense was that surface parking is not a great way of utilizing some critical commercial space. These are the existing thresholds, so to speak, that we were intrigued by, but are not very interesting at the moment. And then the sort of greenway that moves through the east side and the common. And what do we do with this? You know, of course, we thought this should be connected again with something green. So the greenway, and an idea about, even if it's in your memory or your experience, that these two can actually connect across the viaduct through experience, because literally we can't cut through the viaduct in that many places. So we looked at, like the previous project, we just imagined removing these buildings. We also imagined affecting this portion right here and removing that to create a connection. Like this. Now, for the viaduct, we thought we went through a lot of iterations, and most of them were attaching things to the viaduct, building buildings right up against them. But in this case, we felt like if it was going to engage as an edge, that we would actually dig into the viaduct as a commercial opportunity to enhance the common, so that the common would expand, not just as what it is, but it would begin to have an edge of activity that would activate that site. The idea here is to activate all of these edges of the viaduct. And then the other critical connection here is that if we're going to connect in this direction, and if the proposal here is to make this a sort of a walking street and have it continue onto the site so that these are also integrated in this direction, and continue Thompson into this site, but only as a pedestrian way, so that we could create commercial activity here and engage the park. When we get into the solution, you'll see why we considered this as a possibility as well, as sort of service road, so to speak, for residential development and a way to get into parking. So I'll go through this quickly. These are now buildings that exist on both sides of the viaduct as commercial entities. One-story commercial. We're now, of course, introducing these lines of trees to define the passages spatially. And then this is a proposal for high-density housing. Work-live, we would propose, so that there was a kind of activity there that's not quite retail, but commercial use. This is showing now a way into a parking garage. Sorry? No, it's okay. The parking garage outline below, which in this case, I think we counted 150 cars that we removed, somewhere between 130 and 150, which would mean that there would have to be more than one floor here below grade. But we didn't examine it any further than that. In our case here, we actually were enamored of this depression. So we are actually following the contours down in this case and allowing that to be a compressed, low height, 3, maybe 4 stories at most, a 3-story height block to allow the masking of these by the trees to still occur because of what comes next with the prominence of the viaduct. It supports a larger idea. So here, of course, we add a green space that would be semi-private that would serve retail, potentially restaurants on the backside, other kinds of sales along the street, and then the residences below. And then on levels above would be larger units on one side with the smaller work-live spaces along the south side, and a proposed connection that's engaged with the buildings, something glass that rises up into the viaduct that allows a connection that doesn't take up valuable public space. So the proposal then ends up with, rather than what we started with, a bunch of penetrations that rely now entirely on the quality of this piece of viaduct to create a threshold, a new urban landmark. And there it is, sort of the configuration of the buildings that pass through below, a park which has connections to the common but remains semi-public, semi-private, I should say, and then below with connections to the park beyond. And then these are now just sort of visionary three-dimensional sketches to give you an idea about what we had in mind here. This is the end of Winchester Terrace and how it might move through the space. The idea of the viaduct is to take something in complete contrast to the stone wall, something diaphanous, luminous, and light that might block sound when there are activities in the common, but still maintain a kind of civic presence. And so the idea of these pieces that we took out of the viaduct below is open. It's an idea that could be many things. For example, it could be a farmer's market. It could be permanent retail. It could be antique sales seasonally, etc. The idea is that the skin of the enclosure of the viaduct would open and close to create a canopy along that new pedestrian street and create a space like this. That would be a continuation of the park, but an active edge. And again, trying to seriously activate this so that there's a reason to be here rather than just the beauty of the wall itself, but through public activity. This is an idea about a canopy that would protect it from weather there, and a continuation into the Waterfield block. Again, this is just a notion about the courtyard, the semi-private courtyard with residences surrounding it, higher density on one side, lower density on the other, and how the viaduct might interact with that, and how the retail that would pass through it to the east would engage the viaduct. And then finally, the idea of the viaduct enclosure as the thing to look at. That's why we've kept everything rather low level, so that it becomes a very serious and memorable landmark in the city. It's shaped in response to where a platform might begin and end. It intersects and connects these portions of the site to one another. And even from this funny little line you see that opens and closes, it's even meant to provide wayfinding methods so you know where the exit is, because the roof and the glazing of the opening on top will get wider at that moment. So these are just ideas about possibilities. And I'll stop there.
Questions or reactions? The slide previously showed the view from the courtyard across that part of the river. I really like that openness and connecting those two spaces a lot.
That's the idea of these images, is to try to just have some ideas about how you could penetrate it. Technically, we could do that. And the idea is how to make it through that stone. I like that.
Stand up and yell.
Could you explain what the addition to material for the fire considering that you don't use an active and adding something unusual about that?
Sure.
What's the question?
She was asking about the material that we're proposing above the viaduct, the enclosing material. I actually said translucent. Because I think that we're not looking to make it transparent. We're looking to, translucency would give it a kind of sense of a new object or landmark in the town, where things from the outside looking in, the light you know, as the train moves by at night or during the day, the stripe, the purple stripe would, you know, be somewhat fuzzy. And that things like tall landmarks, the church steeple, trees, etc., would be a sense of something that you have that once you emerge would become visible. So it would be some kind of translucent material, presumably glass with a steel structure of some sort. But really this is, yeah, it's purely conceptual. It's an idea about, and the reason it's folded like it is to give it a kind of textural response that's very different from the texture of the stone. So it's completely dependent on the foundation which is already there, so to speak. Well, again, it's a purely conceptual notion. As I said, those could be permanent retail, but I imagine that, you know, if it was glazed, for example, that it would be useful in the winter with a canopy over it to have, you know, other temporary artists, antiques, whatever might come in and out of there. It could always be permanent retail, but I think to enliven the town common, if it were seasonal, it might become more interesting. So a farmer's market would be great over the summer and the fall, and then it might change into something else. But at this point, we haven't gotten any deeper into it than that. It's just to say that it would be great to utilize that square footage under there that at the moment is wasted for some activity that would activate the edge of the town common. So it's not right now it feels like you're backed up from the viaduct. When you have your back towards the existing retail, you know, that you have one sense of it, but when you turn and take your back to the viaduct, you have a whole other feeling about the town common. So what we're trying to do is eliminate that by putting a different kind of retail there, something that would be smaller and more repetitive. And that's, I guess, as far as we've thought it through at the moment.
Did your plan include anything about housing? Type of housing?
Yeah, these earlier, this area here, this is first level retail. This portion here and above is the proposal there is for high density housing. This whole block is essentially housing except the first level underneath these. So above might be 1 and 2 bedroom, maybe even 3 bedroom, but on this side, that band is assumed to be, you know, work, live, studio type apartments. So that the idea here is a graphic, but what it's really portraying is increase the density and mix the demographics so that it allows for younger people to also live in Winchester and commute into Boston, etc.
Do you think at all about ways to expose the central part that's hidden from the street? And I'm guessing you have all the buildings.
This? Yeah. I mean, it really plays off of what exists here now, but without the frustration of termination. So you can see what we've done here is while it appears to be a singular block, at least on the first couple of levels, the idea is that they're really cut through. So that there's a visual, in fact, from here, we're trying to also align these to make visual connections all the way across to other parts of the park as well. So that it's really kind of porous. And these are the kinds of things that would be a subject, including these would be the subject of design, gauging exactly how wide those would be to achieve that and what their functions are. But the reason we showed this as being narrow like this came, the idea came from this, but then when we had a court inside, the idea was it becomes a great place as a semi-public space where if you have kids playing that need to be watched, for young families, it's separate from other public places, somewhat protected, so to speak.
David Anderson. I really like the way you jump
intersection with on-street and Waterfield was really great. And the basic strength of the river at that point. So it was.
Yeah. And the idea is to do this at many different scales. So the viaduct is one cut through. The streets are another level. The continuation of pedestrian streets, and then the small alleys between buildings that connect the courtyard. So that it's a common theme that continues to scale down, but it's always about public space as it narrows to private space.
I love that. I know that today is September 13th. We're not thinking about the MBTA project, but there's also the soul crushing reality of dealing with that.
Of course. Right. Well, this is a unique opportunity to express ideas that might unify.
I think we can take something away from just what you proposed here, as a way of keeping, sort of understanding the reality such as this, but keeping some of these ideas rolling through and keeping helpful.
It's possible. I mean, this is one of those things where it can be done as a singular infrastructure project, or if it's thought through carefully, it's a staged one that eventually affects the entire viaduct, but doesn't suddenly. But you have to think about it. You have to project forward and say, what can we do with it, before you can start thinking about the small parts and how they might affect some, development down the road.
Questions, ideas, somebody want to ask about parking? Similar access through the public street parking access to the garage?
It's undercooked, but one of the ideas of this street was to create, we created an access point here, and we didn't want to have a kind of intersection of pedestrians crossing into here and the crush of people trying to get on the train, etc., at that same moment where cars go down. And I think this is very public. So rather than find a way into parking here, because cars turning in and out obviously create problems, we created this sort of access road just for that reason, to get here and underneath into a parking space. Yeah, do it from the back side.
David's question, ask Paul on this one. Your thoughts?
Does your alleyway then connect to the extension of the Johnson Street so you can drive all around the local complex?
Well, this here, we actually thought of that as a physical connection, but not a vehicular one. Only because I would imagine that these would be great places for restaurants that could spill out into this area. That's why we created this demarcation of trees to define the end of that interior space and exterior space is sort of architecturalized, and then the waterway beyond. So it could, but I think it'd be disruptive to it.
Reaction, ideas? Drew?
So picking up on the last idea, the architect said the website on the
Potentially, yeah. I mean, you leave it at the culvert or a bridge or whatever.
I see you made the conservation commission work halfway, and they all be down in the parking lot. Sir?
So you seem to make the trade line that some sort of object, and you can see through the street. But how do you access it? What should be the idea of accessing the street? It seems here that it's sort of
Accessing the platform level. This right here. Let me see if I can find. I can't really see it. See this over here? So these are glazed retail, and then this is an enclosed stair that goes up an elevator. So it's kind of rather than doing a ramp, which I think unless you create a landscape, for example, that is a language of ramps and things, to recreate a ramping system going up for us was not in the language of what we're doing. So we just created a stair and elevator as a way of getting up there.
That's cool. Okay. Good, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm Peter Nobley, and I'm going to hand this to Dennis Carlone for a minute while I fire us up. So, Dennis?
I'm going to try to talk without this. Can you hear me in the back? If this profession doesn't work, I've thought about going into opera because I was told I have great projection. Well, you'll let me know if I do or not. We've taken a very different approach. And in fact, we heard from Betsy Elizabeth Ware that one of the great things about this study is they chose people with 3 different approaches. And I have to agree. As we're waiting, we looked at this a little differently. We said this will not be developed as one master plan, but in fact, it probably should be developed so that the existing businesses, the existing buildings can continue until it's time, if ever, to make changes, number one. Number two, people said they could hear me, but all right, I think the microphone echoes too much, but I'll do what you wish. Okay, for the Baroness, I will speak up. We've decided that this project needs to be feasible. If the existing buildings can be on a different schedule and don't have to come down, that would be great. The existing businesses on the first floor in particular are a great range of retail. I can tell you we worked in other towns and cities that would die for that range of retail. Generally what we found is that, I'm not going to read all this, but just know that it will be on the website. These are the guidelines that we were given. The blue are additional comments, but I'll talk about those as we go along. And the third thing was that parking always is the big issue. We don't want it to be, as urban design architects, we think there are other things that are important, hopefully you do too. But we decided to disturb as little of the parking as possible. So as much as we think the commons should go right to the viaduct, we don't propose that fully. We propose a change, and you'll see it. We don't take out the average on a parking lot. That could happen over time. That's great. We designed the project trying to recognize the needs of the existing properties next to us, which we'll talk about, and looked at those buildings as if they could be added on top of, not taken down. So this is a view that we got from the Winchester Archives. A representative is here if you wish to talk to her later. It's an image of the town center in 1946. I, like you, many of you were not born yet, but that's what it was. What's interesting is there's a blow-up of the old railroad station, which was at grade, the railroad tracks at grade, and Waterfield Street does not go through. That's why Laraway Street is there. There are trees along the tracks and along Laraway Street on the other side. On the other side of what is now Waterfield, there was a turnabout, so this was the formal drop-off to walk across the tracks or over the bridge to the station. So it was much more of a traditional village kind of setup. I assume in the early 60s, late 50s, that changed, but this was the old station, had a lot of charm. There was a place to get out of the weather. It probably had a men's room and a women's room, and those days are gone. Now, so we look for inspiration. We're urban design architects. To us, this should look like Winchester. Winchester has an image. Doesn't mean it can't change, but that it should feel right. And so we look for examples. This is a wonderful community called Forest Hill Gardens. It was built from 1906 to 22, the majority of it was. It was a railroad town. This is the new railroad at the time. Right there's the station. It's right at the heart of the town square. In fact, there is the town square today. There's a bridge under which you go into the town square, and that is low-income housing, believe it or not, when it was built. It's right there. It is a wonderful place to live. It's one of the more desirable. This was the town square early drawing. That was a view in the 60s. It looks largely like that now. It has a new town of that period kind of look to it, very village-like. Another thing that came to mind is we know there's an easement going right through the site. The other architects dealt with it in their way, and we decided that it was, I'm sorry, I'm going to get out of your way. We decided that it was very important that the wall of the commons continue, and that in essence the easement became a passageway, under which, above which, would be the discussed community room. In Boston, this is the Tontine Crescent, was built by Bullfinch. That was given to the public library. That was given to the Mass Historical Society. It was built, and unfortunately came down 50 years later. We had other thoughts. One is, we know although there are no kids here tonight, you love children in this town. We came to the market affair a few weekends ago and saw all the kids and the people in the common. It was quite wonderful. This axis that's been discussed, continuing the Locatelli block, or Winchester Terrace, I think it was called. And we totally agree with that, but what we're going to propose is that there be a rings-like fountain as you come through the wall at that portion of the common. So it becomes an activity that everybody loves. Frankly, when on the weekend, people, if they're in the downtown, they tend to shop, they tend to go to the library, they tend to go to the post office. The kids will bring them downtown. Also, there's a term called Woonorf. It's Dutch. If you have any Dutch friends, you can say Woonorf and they'll think you speak Dutch. Woonorf is a living street. And a living street in Holland, 2 million people live on living streets. Living streets are for people and bicycles, priority one. Cars and service vehicles can go on it, but they have to go at a very slow speed, 5-10 miles per hour even. If the streets tend to be not very big, that's a Woonorf in the upper right corner. Kids are playing, you see the bollards. This is one in England that's less graceful. And this is a new public market community room, believe it or not. It's in a new town, that good old Prince Charles, who we happen to know personally, who'd be glad to do something here, I'm sure. No, we don't know him personally, but this is a new marketplace building that was built as an integral part of the town center. So this notion of a community room above a market, an archway, was in our mind. You know all these buildings. We walked around just like everybody else and noticed the great buildings and the characteristics of that, the spaces. We noticed that there are some public active spaces, but not that many. You might all be in this picture somewhere. This was the celebration just last month, and the great activity with the kids. Loads of people, many more than you see in this picture. But there you are at the Common, and just like our other co-teammates have discussed, lurking in the background is really not a very attractive structure. And to us, that is the most critical thing for your town, is to get a station that fits in and feels right. And that will be a struggle, of course. So these are views of the station area. You already know that. This is a proposal for treating walls that Michael Singer did, and I'm going to let Peter mention a little bit about Michael.
I'll just mention briefly, this is a colleague of ours, Michael Singer, is an artist, an environmental interventionist, I would say, has done a number of projects where walls are treated as kind of giant biofiltration projects. They can become kind of living walls. Some of them are planted, some of them are sculptural. but it's a way of addressing the fabric of the wall in a way that sort of inspires people and actually treats the rainwater also coming off the platform at the same time, potentially.
So getting the T to agree that even longer term, something else could happen beyond this project is absolutely key, as well as doing it now. I'm not going to go through the analysis, you've all done that, but let me add one thing. The best, oh, that's the wrong switch. The best solar view is from the private forest. This is south going north. If you do put a bar building here, it will cast quite a few shadows. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. You already know the station is dilapidated, but the underpass in particular is very depressing. And whatever you do at the station, and the other two solutions can incorporate this, breaking down that wall and making it more a part of the city is key. Widening the sidewalk, even doubling it from 6 feet 2 inches to 12 feet 4 inches would make a huge difference. Lighting, ceiling treatment, that's part of the station design. There are some, as I said earlier, there's some great active retail edges. We propose not disturbing that. Everybody has talked about this parking lot and how inappropriate it is. We don't suggest taking out the parking, although I'd love to. We suggest modifying the street and making it parallel parking. The T-station, as others have shown, and we'll show you in a moment, instead of these ramps, there's no reason why there needs to be ramps on both sides, both ends. At this end, the more town-oriented end, if you will, where more activity is, it could be stairs enclosed with glass, which I'll get to in a moment, and elevator. At the other end, it probably shouldn't be along the commons. It should be at the far end. You want to spread out a T-station entry as much as you can to help activate the retail and the downtown as much as you can. It doesn't belong at the commons. The private homes, what we've learned over the years is you build very carefully next to wealthy homes. They know lawyers. So there's the parking lot as it exists. Peter, did you want to add something? My brother-in-law is a real estate lawyer, if you're interested. No, he's not. I'm kidding. But there's the parking lot. Our proposal is this. It's hard to read. I know you'll see a first floor plan in a moment, but these are the existing buildings. We've added 1.5 floors on it. This is the new T-station. It's enclosed. Even the upper portion is partially enclosed for weather protection as well as blocking the sound for all these properties. We've created two public spaces, one private space. This is the easement. There's an opening under the building that you'll see in a moment. And then there's a second little courtyard. So these properties have a handsome courtyard to look out of. One way to spur redevelopment of adjacent sites is you upgrade their views. If it's at all possible, you make a place. It could be a place where a restaurant in those buildings come out. In fact, the French pastry shop could have outdoor eating in an Italian restaurant overlooking this. Waterfield, that is a restaurant, that is a fountain. This is the Locatelli block. There is the spray fountain right there. And the private courtyard is for the new apartment building. This is it on the first floor, and I think will make more sense. So here is the easement going through the site, that dotted line. The planning board recommended the thought of having service access being through the viaduct. This is the existing opening through the viaduct. There's the proposed one. We've limited that. We know, we've worked with the MBTA. We know the reality of getting them to do anything beyond the absolute minimum. They'll say this is beyond it. So the roads and car access is here. There's the parking garage on top of which is the apartment building. These are service zones for the apartment building. That's the lobby for the apartment building. I won't go into detail about that. We then created this space, as I mentioned before. This is the connector building that you'll see in a moment. That could be a restaurant, could be connected to the next building, if that makes sense. This is an MBTA cafe, which was proposed. That's the stair enclosed area for the MBTA and the elevator at the corners. This elevator could serve the upper portion of the bar building. We've preserved these buildings as they are. We were told that this owner might be interested in adding additional floors. So this is what we heard, and that's what we worked with. Am I missing it? Oh, this is the entry for pedestrians to get into the public parking at that point. It's right at the end of this tunnel and right at the access with that underpass right there. You can't read these, so they're a mystery to you, but these are the evolution of the drawings, and I was going to explain a little more about the generation of the plans. Well, we call these ghost drawings. I don't know if you know why. And you can't read that either, but you begin to see you'll see better drawings in a moment. These were the process drawings that we were asked to include. And here is the continuation of the easement as a raised archway, different than Bullfinch. There's the community room or community rooms. There is the tower that incorporates the elevator to the MBTA, the elevator to the community room, and could continue up to the attic floor as well. This is the elevator coming down. They're purposely different. This is the existing retail. If you know the building, the Sarabian building, this is STEM over here, Monet over there. This is the existing storefronts, actually. This we've altered a bit to make it stronger, and that, of course, has been added on top. I'll let Peter continue with drawings that'll make the explanation a little clearer.
Thank you. Thank you. I get to do the pretty pictures. So we've just got a few, I don't want to take too much time, we've got a few views. We did a study model like the other teams, and this is the character of ours, you can see, is essentially drawing from the character of much of what exists in Winchester. So this is a view looking from the southwest, or the north, I can't remember which one, northwest. So you can see the volume we've built up over the existing corner, and then this bridge building, which sort of sets back and becomes a bit of a plaza. The existing's on the left, proposed on the right. Going to the opposite corner, now this is less developed, but it's the apartment building with 2 levels of parking below and a private courtyard. This could obviously be something a little more contemporary once you're inside the court. Here's a view similar on the existing photograph on the bottom right. This is what that might look like standing up around the platform. So now you can see the bridge building and into the Wunarf. Here we are standing inside that court, looking back out toward Waterfield. So this is the sort of living street concept. There aren't any cars in this view, but it would be pedestrian, bikes, shared. Dennis?
There will be trash trucks, fire engines, taxis coming by. That one-off could serve that. As you come into the garage, before you go into the garage, you make it right into the one-off. We've designed it so the trash truck fits there. In 5 minutes, it's gone. The same with service delivery for the adjoining buildings. Right now, in the parking lot is used by the adjacent buildings for their service deliveries. Well, it's not going to be immediately adjacent to the building, but there will be spaces, and there are in the plan. You can look at it later for that. So we try to incorporate the needs of the neighbors as well as improve the view. The building is the same distance away from the viaduct as Thompson Street buildings are.
That's right. Another thing, we're not differentiating materials, but the idea is that the cafe around the MBTA would be mostly glass. We really, I think some of the other teams had some wonderful ideas about how to address that wall and maybe glazing the whole cafe and elevator stair sequence would be actually pretty interesting. And there's a kind of overview of the scheme. So you can see we're trying to draw from different architectural characters and styles in the town, and really trying to densify that site. And I think the last thing I have for you, let me just see if I can do this.
So the buildings at the corner are 2.5 stories high. We might want it to go a little higher, but that seemed what Winchester was.
So here's a little animation. So this is going from the commons. So now you're sort of traveling down through along the wall, and this is what it might feel like to go through this arched building into that courtyard. And then you can see the scale in there. This is again that sort of living street concept, and then turning around, this would be the glazed-in cafe, which doesn't look like glass. Looking back onto Waterfield Street, and then there's the private courtyard there. So I could play it again. It was pretty fast. I'll play it one more time. How about that? So that's our presentation.
There's the rain fountain that looks like ice, but really meant to be water.
It's moving a little fast. I think it's making me move
So
here.
this gives the impression of a railroad station image, and that was important to us. There's the pedestrian entry on the right, more right. To the parking garage. There's the existing passage underneath. That's the back of a cafe. And that actually leads to the little courtyard that combines the 3 buildings at that corner. So we're, I think, ready to take any comments, thoughts. So all 3 very different, and I think that's been very interesting for us, I have to say. We rarely get that opportunity.
Questions, ideas, responses? Sir.
You mentioned that technically,
What would you do? If you're talking about the other end of the MBTA, might get myself in trouble here, but I think the ramps along the common and in the alley does not serve Winchester well, especially the alley and the commons. I think the ramp should be on the other end of the rotary and where the parking lot is, and you can do something similar to this. And I know people say you can't drop off in a rotary, but there could be a roundabout street, much like's been proposed on this site, to get traffic around at a drop-off. Where that parking lot now exists on the east side, northeast side of the rotary. Oh, yes. Okay. I don't know the name. Great idea.
Comments, questions, clarifications, Bill?
What's the problem residential units and square footage?
In the new building, the question was, what is the rough square footage, numbers of units and rough square footage? One of the things we were unsure of is, well, what we show is 1 floor parking at grade, 1 floor down. There are problems going down. On the other hand, once that area, we know the area can flood. When it floods, you're not going to get in there anyway, so we did put it down. Now, if you go up, you can get more parking. But at what point are you separating the housing from the ground and the courtyard from the grounds? But what we've shown is 1 level above for parking and 3 levels housing. You can go 4 levels housing. The new building shows 36 to 40 units depending on the size. The 36 are at 1,200 square feet, which the board had asked for a range of size. So assuming it's in the order of 800 to 1,200, 42. The buildings above Mr. Sarabian's storefronts, if one converted that, it's another, I believe it was 15 to 18, depending on the size. So for a total, it's in the order of 50. If you did additional work, went additional heights, that'd be different. It'd be higher, obviously. We limited it to what we thought might be feasible.
I'm looking at the first post. I'm going to go right there.
It's a great house.
Good site for parking. Good site for parking.
We appreciate you beginning your analysis by looking back at the history of kind of what Winchester really is. And I think that's the right track, hopefully, for some fall. This is, in fact, really the train station as what it has to function as. There are about 1,000 people a day get on and off the train right there. And so parking is an extremely important consideration. And I think that we dealt with that a little bit, but all three of the plans really did, in my mind, anyway, deal with having parking for the train station, which is critical, and also the downtown area for shores. Everybody talked about creating additional retail and commercial space there, which would again require additional parking. That's, in my mind, the central problem for us here. Although architecturally, I think that the kind of thing that you were describing by putting a piece on the Schraden building, moving up a little bit, and then the archway, etc., that's getting back to the kind of thing we should. The other comment that I wanted to make is a couple of you mentioned the ramps. Worst possible of the things that we have. One of the first presenters pointed out that the elevation of the tracks on Church Street were almost at top. I think it was 5 feet difference between the elevation. And it would be nice, however, if we sort of filled the common in to bring that side of the train station to grade, so that all those ramps on that side and the west side of the train station would be eliminated. You could walk and get on the train. That's a possibility. Under that fill might be popular.
There was in fact, there is in fact in the archive, a set of plans that the town started in the 1900s, I think, early 1900s, looking at how to solve the problem of people being killed when the train went through and you were going through what was in the after and things like that. And one of the proposals was to elevate the town. To leave the railroad tracks at ground level, elevate the town, basically which would have aggravated downstream flooding, but would have taken care of the problem we have in the town center. Other comments, questions? Peter, sir?
I like the concept that was presented by a few of you having sort of a destination, a focal point, something visual that's interesting. So in your presentation, the towers caught my eye for that reason. And as a photographer, the idea of having sort of a 3 or 4 story tower that's open and available to the public with a 360-degree view, assuming it's above the railroad tracks, and you get a good picture all the way around. I think that's really interesting.
We did that for you.
Questions, ideas, reactions? Okay. Well, I'm going to open the floor now to basically all 3 design teams and to everybody here tonight. I'd like to sort of sit back and say, we asked 3 very qualified teams, each of which has a different sort of approach and perspective on this. Take a look at this one and all come up with different ideas about how you organize this. What I think I'd like to ask is that people back off and say, what are the common elements that you like pieces of this? We saw multiple different uses, housing. Right now, it's very difficult to do that. Some of the obvious changes you have to make is to allow housing by right. Retail is kept in place. Most of them kept some sort of parking limitation. We have to downsize the parking requirements so the developers can afford to build it and make some sort of night use for residents, day use for employees. I'd like to get people's reaction, the design team's reaction to the general set of concepts they saw. I don't feel necessary to defend your own particular one, but I'd like to basically get back to the question of if we as a town reset the zoning and review rules for developing this area. What are the basic sort of outlines of what we'd like to see in this area, and therefore what would we like to put in the zoning to make something like one of these feasible in the future if we like one of these. So I'll open it up to anybody's question of what they liked, what they didn't like across all three, what they thought about it, and should we go ahead and rezone this area to do something different? Or should we just sit and leave it as it is?
Do I know?
You're a regular, you can answer yes. But you have to stand up. Again, the acoustics here are adequate, but you have to stand up and yell, so.
There's a microphone.
For zoning purposes, this site is presently an SPI zone and a commercial zone. So any integrated effort would have to change the zoning. I want to comment on all three design teams. I want to thank them. They have gone well beyond our duty. I think they all need a huge work with, very communicative, intent I will comment that there are elements of all three that I really like. Amani Whitten, I really love the idea of connection. I really love thinking out of the box in terms of how blocks sound. The internal courtyard and the housing around it, that all works. The whole idea of looking at the open spaces and the way the town is developed, I think was important in that design, and I think that design worked for me a lot. Carlone LPA, I like the integration of the Forest Hills idea. I think it works extremely well in this setting. At first, I thought it was a huge mistake in terms of setting back that building closest to the T, and then I realized that you need that setback for visual purposes for vehicular traffic, and also if you're going to put cafes or whatever out front of the anymore, that makes a little sense. Out of this, I liked the buffer of residential housing to the Rangeley neighborhood. I think it might want to scale down a little bit so that there's not too much sun blockage. I also liked keeping the storefronts and upper stories with residential in that whole block. I think I won't even talk about parking because everybody else talks about parking. So, but I think all of them have very interesting details to look at, and I intend to look at it a lot more over the next couple of years. Sorry, what do you want to say? Do you want to say something
Really? I just want to talk the Eagle World parking for 2 seconds because I just want to remind everybody we're looking for new vision for parking. And one idea is that, which addresses the new retail spaces. When the residents have gone to work, those parking spaces are available for the retail and other people in the town to use. So the shared idea of the new parking, we have to start talking about. How do we share parking all day and not just have it be solely for one piece? And that will really increase the parking numbers without building so much more parking. So it's been good.
Comments, ideas, reactions? Roger?
This is the first, the only place where the entire area is really under the control of the town, leaving aside some other buildings on the other side of the site. And maybe a few occasions we have actually get something going, difficulties, and all the rest of the places. So my inclination would be to try to come up with something that's maybe a little more shops, additional spaces, additional housing, because we need more people downtown. And as I say, demand, there's a good opportunity. It's just not today.
Comments? Design team react to Steve?
Well, the three submissions are some tree which what can be done there. See that shows that place. I like the idea of emphasizing the station. I like the idea if we could do away with the ramp sites. But I think there are 3 or 4 keys to evaluation. What are we going to do with the Great Wall? Number 2, I think the idea of the underground parking garage is very financially feasible. I think the density is a key. I think if any developer is going to be able to do this, it's going to have to be realized in the dense mixed use with retail and residential. I think the idea of having of doing away with our adding that on in terms of zoning, seizing the systems, it's the density, it's the mixed use.
Just a brief big picture comment. I like the design recap of Mr. Parker's just said. But I think I want to characterize the biggest picture in terms. I think this is an opportunity here to convert surface parking into a destination. Make this someplace that I've had some occasion to be near Station Landing in the Wellington Station area. Just make this instead of something that looks like something you want to drive by fast. Not avert your eyes to someplace that people would actually come to. And, you know, the parking, I appreciate that point. Generally, places that I want to go to, the parking's tight because people want to go there. And I think that's just part of something we have to be mindful of. But I just think the opportunity, big picture, make this the whole town center a point of interest would be something we should not let go of.
John Civic, and one of the things I like in all 3 proposals is the housing that's being proposed is not 3,000 square foot, 1,200, 1,500, smaller units for a broad range of people, attracting a number of people in the town. You've been caught in a situation where all the housing, the vast majority of the housing that's been developed in the town ends up costing $800, $900 million. And I think the housing contained in this meets town needs.
I would point out, for those of you who want bedtime reading, we did a short look at the housing market in the center. Ina helped us finance, and I think Darren, who's done some economic development study for it a few years ago, did it. And her conclusion was that the town center could easily absorb a couple hundred housing units over the next 10 years. Mostly smaller units. She said there were 2 big markets for it. One is, people who in their 60s and 70s want to get out of their back of Victoria and get into something smaller and might not want to take 2 cars. So, like this would be quite useful. And the other was sort of workforce, younger people who might want to commute in or out, or, married couples without children who are looking for a space where they can commute in Cambridge and Boston. So, being at the transit area, being close in, she said, there's a considerable market out there. The finances of how you get it built and how you sell it, the prices would be something to look at. But there was one of the foundation pieces said pretty clearly there is a good market for it in the center, so that's an opportunity. Betsy?
I just said one of the things that really intrigued me is the whole activate the area.
Yeah, the thing that really interested me was the notion of being able to activate those areas near the train station. So the notion that somebody could come down, grab a quick bite of breakfast, hop on the train, for example. Be able, to have some shops, be able to have, a greengrocer there off the side of Narrow Road. I mean, I think those are opportunities, I think, that would be a terrific addition, frankly, to our downtown. And I think, to Drew's point, I think would really draw people in.
Did someone talk about the wall, the Great Wall? And I know I went with a group to France, the Sister City Exchange, over 20 years ago, and they lived past the forest. That was their welcome to Winchester. They lived past, and we were coming back and saying, what are we going to do with that? And I said, why don't we light the wall? We will light the wall. Is there ever, instead of hiding it, covering it, is there any thought to have it be what it is and have some kind of interesting light?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. One of the things that we talked about at the beginning is it's actually a really beautiful wall.
Yeah.
There's a lot of junky pieces and interior pieces to it. There's ways of carving into it. Another thing that some of you may be familiar with some of the projects in Paris, for example, the Berlin, where there's actually retail spaces inserted in it. Now that may be kind of beyond the scope of MBTA negotiations, but a beautiful bridge lighting project, so there could quite easily be. And actually, there's a pretty good light office in the Boston area that actually works with lighting infrastructure, so it would be a great idea.
So sometime in another meeting, Beth Rudolph, our town engineer, going back to Waverham, and Mary will tell you their experience in discussing the early planning stages of this, and how flexible the team was on some of their ideas. That's a whole other discussion.
We didn't get a chance to talk about it because we tried to cut the presentation to a few minutes, but one of the thoughts we had on planting new trees on Laraway Street is to light the back wall, so that at night you not only see the wall, you see the silhouette of the trees. But the key is to get rid of the ramps. The ramps are not attractive. The wall is quite beautiful, but the ramps are the worst place of the wall.
I really like the idea of creating something iconic, something that would draw a resident, bring a visitor, and be willing to drive 10 or 20 miles to come and see what is going to be built here in Winchester. I think that's really compelling. And I have some reservations about the idea that anything that gets built has to look like it's already here. My thesis is that contrast enhances the beauty of what's here. So something very futuristic, modern-looking glass, whatever it may be. I think the juxtaposition of those two things makes them both more beautiful. You look at a city like London, all the amazing, beautiful buildings, even in Boston. I think that juxtaposition enhances the beauty of what we have now, as well as what we build. And it'd be a real shame to just build more brick.
This is a question that eventually we'll get to. The current zoning doesn't have design guidelines in it. So one of the questions, in addition to sort of taking the zoning a lot of different things with uses and heights and building masses, Steve was outlining, one of the questions that the town will look at is, do we want to do anything, any guidelines, either voluntary or mandatory, for form or materials? This question is being narrowed down to downtown balances. We would not talk through that at all at this stage. We haven't
Why don't we start with the Secretary of Interior standards for the sort of those? Because one of the things that frown upon to me, on the other hand, when you ask for design enhances, make it just a little bit, it's actually quite a good, concise guideline.
Okay, that's a suggestion. Ina?
Hi, I'm Ina Anderson with the Mass Smart Growth Alliance, and I'm really excited about the turnout here tonight and the fantastic ideas that have been proposed and the great job that all three firms did. I've been really impressed. And I've been really impressed with the quality of your observations and comments. And I really want to applaud some of your forward thinking about not having to mimic the past and increasing density. These are things that involve a lot of change, and I'm really glad to hear that you all are willing to kind of go on this leap and go out with these concepts and think about some other ways to bring density and life to the town center. So sometimes when I tell people the communities that we're working with, and I say we're working in Winchester, they're a little bit surprised. And they're wondering what's going on, what's happening in Winchester around smart growth. And so I think that when I come here and I hear you folks talking about these wonderful sort of concepts of wanting mixed use, wanting to bring more activity into the town center, increasing the density, and leveraging your transit and your transit-oriented development opportunities, that's what it makes me think. That's why we chose Winchester. So congratulations on all of that, and good luck in the future as you start to really consider what you're going to actually do and how you're going to actually change your zoning to accommodate it. But I think you're off to a really great start.
Comments, observations? I'd like the design team, this is not a competition in which we do all three projects, no money, unfortunately. But having seen all the presentations and you three are probably three teams, a couple of spent more time thinking about the downtown in the last 10 years here. Your comments, observations on sort of lessons we ought to remember, key things as we take away on what was going on ideas.
I'll just start it. A part of our practice is implementation. And if you want to keep the density down but still make the project viable, it means an active public interface. It means owning the garage. A developer's not going to build that many parking spaces for the few apartments above, relatively few. But if you somehow do a lease arrangement, you can get public funding. MBTA, state, transit-oriented development, it makes sense to me. The same with the public space that we showed or other schemes showed. If that can be developed by the town and controlled, at least in our scheme, you can get money for that. And this is exactly the kind of project that the governor would love. And in a town, that would sort of set the precedent for other towns. If Winchester can do it, then why can't we? That kind of thing.
Even the meeting on this, it was quickly and clearly responsible, so we can use it for other towns too. So we've heard that too.
Well, I meant as far as the parking cost, the land cost. That's how you get, you lease the land, you don't sell the land. You get the taxes, you get what you want, and it makes the project much more viable. It's that kind of implementation strategy that's going to happen here.
The statement was that we want to keep the density down. Is that
If people don't want 5-story buildings, the only way to do that is to bring the cost of the other elements down. If they do want it, I'm still not sure a developer would pay for that many parking spaces if they don't control all the spaces. And I sense that might be part of the thought. And I'm just warning against it.
my question is, you're assuming that we want to keep the density down. Is that true?
We haven't done an analysis, but my gut says that there are so many costs associated with the site. Vibrations, sound from the station, the water, parking. All of a sudden, what do you have to build to make that work? You might not care for that. That's all I'm saying. That it doesn't have to be big. It can be somewhat smaller if you make it a public-private project, which frankly are the only ones that tend to happen. That's my experience.
With respect to some of the questions or comments that were made about density, I think that clearly the site is deep enough, and I think all of our responses were very similar. We tended to establish a street edge, create something that, and I think with respect to density, I would advocate more, but I think there's a certain point where it would, there's a limit at which it would not fit in the scale of the town. But certainly a lot denser than what's around.
density is what makes cities and it's what makes communities. And my point, I don't think we should be starting from the point of view of minimizing it. We should be seeing what the upper level of density is, which is what I'm saying. Somebody who lives here, I would like to reinforce that. There is room for a lot more density in the town of Winchester, particularly in the downtown.
I think more and more people are agreeing with you. The future is exactly this. More and more people are realizing that density brings a tremendous number of benefits with it. But I think Betsy at the last meeting showed some terrific slides which said that density is the past of this town. That there are a number of 1- and 2-story buildings that were once 3- and 4-story buildings. So this town was dense, it got less dense, and I think what we're suggesting is, in many ways, back to the future, bringing back the vitality through increased density. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other is, you have a really tough challenge writing zoning, because zoning tends to be reactive. Zoning tends to prevent the worst, and often it prevents the best. So you write design standards, and it's a little easy to end up in sort of phony baloney. You know, Disneyland, you want to allow more opportunities, but you don't want to allow the worst sort of scaleless buildings. And I've read a lot of design standards. It's hard to find good ones, but I'm hoping you could find a way that will allow the best. And part of it depends on getting a good developer. And, you know, maybe the town wants to court developers. You know, this isn't going to be, none of this is going to be built by the town. It'll be built by developers. Trying to court the very best. So you're not beating them on the head with the stick. You're you know, seducing them into doing something terrific. So, interesting challenge you've got.
I would agree with it. I think one of the problems is legislative technical style, etc. I would advocate public review as a part of the process as a way to control including the town decision. I do think it applies to class titles and try to explain what the not move that.
I can assure you that Winchester, we review everything. For 2 or 3 years at the minimum, and it's vociferous, so there's nothing that happens to town. Even the trash collection system isn't reviewed vociferously, so any number of colleagues here can testify to that. So we can promise you that we want to review that.
So speaking of review, one thing I would say is I think it would be interesting somehow to bring the MWRA and the MBTA closer into the design process somehow. I mean, they seem to be a little bit on the periphery as sort of dangerous, not dangerous is probably the wrong word, I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but there's something about the restrictions that those two organizations in the state, the constraints they're putting on this project. It would be really interesting to bring them in a positive way into this project.
I think part of the problem with putting down this law early on was because the MBTA said, well, if you have any ideas of what you better bring to us earlier than later, limited funds and moving ahead. So they're certainly, I think, interested in participating, but they're not going to give us that ideas.
One of the things that clearly the train stop offers is a connection to other places. And I think to go back to the beginning,
The one thing about the MWRA, well, and the MBTA, they're huge, and that's difficult. But when the site is developed and the foundations are going in, you would want the MWRA to open up their easement and see the condition of those pipes, because they say it's fine, but you don't want to develop a project and 3 years later there's an unplanned geyser. So that seems like a logical thing, but it usually doesn't happen. But if the developer's excavator's there, it's easy to do.
We explored that option with other projects a little further north and down, and we're told that they agree with you. It would be nice to come up and take a look at it, but they'd rather not for fear of what would happen if they did. So that's been something interesting. It's 18, some of it's built in the 1870s, 1890s, and some of it's newer. But there's a little bit of hesitation to open it up even to see what condition it's in. So.
We had a dive team go down to the WRA by the end of the project was finished.
Okay, last comments, that's it?
The pipe that's there is 1893 brick.
Yeah, so what they really told us consistently was we don't want, you can drive on it and pave on it, but we want 18 feet or so of clearance, because we need to get a backhoe and dig in there really quickly with a 30 or 36 inch sewer pipe. We want to do it very quickly. So leave it open so we get into it. Right. I think we'll probably bring the session to a close unless anybody else has key comments they want to make. Let me, Stephen. Yes.
The only further item I would like to thank the planning board for the audience holding hearings tonight. I think it's truly exciting. I think we're heading in the right direction. We appreciate the time of the presenters coming and showing us the possibilities are. So let's give them a hand.
Set the stage very nicely. He figured out how I'm supposed to close the meeting, and so he set me up, pushed me right to it. So, next steps. We're going to take what we've heard from the design teams and the base material. We've had Bennett take a look at the zoning situation. We've had to look at other things. What we're basically intending to do is to put together a working group. We've got a number of you already tagged. I think that's in contact with you. Certainly the meetings will be open, so anybody who's interested, as a friend of the group we're sitting in on is welcome. What we'd like to do, I think, is take a week or so to think about what we've seen, and then begin to sit down and take a look at this block and say, what are the key features that we'd like to carry forward, or at least make feasible? What kind of review, what kind of process would we want to see in development? So we can then begin to translate those into changes in the zoning and the building guidelines. The other thought was then to take this experience and walk around the other, what the various called neighborhoods, their sections. Divide the downtown. There's some very distinct areas. Most of them don't have a big open space, so I don't think we're going to have either the opportunity or the funding to sort of invite 3 highly qualified teams to take a look at it for us. But I think that some of the ideas, what's the mix, what's the density, what's the height, how the building control, what kind of look and feel you want to have to the different sections. The sections around CVS is going to be different from the section we're looking at. Walmart's going to be different than the buying element areas, things like that. But the thought was basically to take each sort of area of the town and say, town center, and say, what could we imagine, the future of this area to be? Do we want to hire lower wetlands? What are the key buildings we want to preserve because they're part of the national historic register district? Which ones, are a little soft and nobody really loves, and we can encourage the owner to think about doing some of that. So that is to walk around and begin to see if we can't put together some tailors and ideas, and then begin to bring those back to town meeting. Obviously, we need to bring before town meeting the proposals. We need a 2/3 vote to do this. So the idea would be to sort of think through these sequentially, see if we can package some set of logical things to do that keep the flavor of the town, make it feasible to do this. So we'll probably start working on that in October, and I guess it's going to take us well into the spring along to work through each of the areas. But we would invite all of you who are interested to participate in that. And since you made the mistake of signing up and putting your email address on Betsy's board tonight, you'll get a barrage of more junk mail from us asking to participate. But we certainly appreciate your time. And life cycle, and a lot of it was summer, and a lot of the architectural firms were interested in doing some really high quality work for very modest amounts of money. And we watch a lot of architects, urban designers, and planners come through before our board, the ZBA, and the others. I think, to reiterate what people have said 3 or 4 times, I've had 3 rather exceptionally good firms and principals put an awful lot of